Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, The Advantage of Enterprise AI in Education. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the Content Director for eSchool News, and I'm happy you were joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by PowerSchool. PowerSchool is a leading provider of cloud-based software for K-12 education in North America. Its mission is to power the education ecosystem with unified technology that helps educators and students realize their full potential in their way. PowerSchool connects students, teachers, administrators, and parents with the shared goal of improving student outcomes. From the office to the classroom to the home, it helps schools and districts efficiently manage state reporting and related compliance, special education, finance, human resources, talent, registration, attendance, funding, learning, instruction, grading, assessments, and analytics in one unified platform. Is that it, right? So now, before we get to our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of our platform that we're using for this webinar. This event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. So if you have a question or comment for us, there is a chat function that you can launch at the bottom. Feel free to use this to ask questions of our panelists or me to forward to the panelists, or to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you're having a technical question. And I really do encourage, if you have ideas or thoughts or questions, it really helps drive the conversation, and we're here to try to answer your questions. So it's really helpful. So with these housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with some introductions. First with me today is Sarah Connors. Sarah is the SMS Program Manager for the Colorado Springs School District D11. Now, with over 35 years of experience in the district as a classroom teacher, librarian, and technology facilitator, Sarah has been dedicated to empowering educators and students alike. In her current role, she draws on her experience to enhance education technology and foster dynamic learning environments. Also with us today is Kelly Addy. Kelly is the Senior Director for Education Strategy and Government Relations at PowerSchool. Kelly has worked in the education sector for more than 30 years. During her time in public education, her work spanned classroom instruction, building level leadership, and central office technology administration for a large school district here in the U.S. In that role, she was responsible for large-scale device rollouts, selection, and implementation of learning systems, and she helped to construct organizational strategic plans. In her current role at PowerSchool, she works nationally and internationally with strategic organizations, districts, and schools who are exploring, developing, and embracing digital transformation for teaching and learning. In addition to leading a team of experienced educational experts, she also supports strategic planning around change management and innovative learning approaches. So it's great to have both of you on the panel today. You're obviously very busy people, and so to be able to take the time to share your insights, I know I speak for our audience that we appreciate it. So as we get into this, you really can't have a conversation in education today without these two little letters popping up within the first 2 or 3 minutes. AI has certainly taken over most of the oxygen in every conversation. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, and there's a reason for it. I mean, it really is something that is going to have a fundamental change in the way that we run our schools. I guess if we wanted to start off, I just wanted to kind of take the temperature of the audience by asking a poll question to see where you guys are feeling about this and how you are currently using AI in your profession. Are you not using it yet? Are you exploring AI tools, but not necessarily implementing them yet? Are you using AI occasionally in teaching and learning? Or has AI already become a key part of our educational approach? One answer that's not on there, I think we're pretty confident that your students are probably using it for better or for worse. That is a separate webinar conversation. There are so many different aspects of AI and how they're going to affect the day-to-day operations of a classroom. But this really is kind of a focus on how faculty are using it and how administration are using it. Again, with that kind of enterprise aspect of AI. So as those results come back, we will give them to you. But in the meantime, maybe I will pass it off to begin to get into the conversation.
All right. Well, thanks, Kevin. That was quite an introduction. So thank you very much for having us here today. Sarah and I have actually had the pleasure of working together in Colorado for many years. So it's always great to get a chance to present with Sarah. And we'd like to welcome everyone here today for our conversation. And this is something, of course, that, as Kevin mentioned, has been really top of mind. And so, as we think about where we are with, the state of AI for teaching and learning, we're going to start off kind of talking about some global things, and then maybe drill down a little bit into how we see this being used in one particular district, and that's D11 in Colorado Springs. And actually, as a way to introduce that, I think it might be helpful, and Sarah, I know we've talked about this before, we actually have a video. D11 actually made the news locally around their usage of AI. And this was, Sarah, this was over a year ago, was it not? That this aired? Yeah, almost exactly. Oh yeah, over a year ago. So it's also kind of interesting for us to reflect on where things really started and where things are now. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and actually just share that video real quickly and just kind of let people see what was newsworthy about this for D11.
Program called Powerbuddy, and one Colorado Springs school district is one of only 12 in the nation testing it right now.
District 11 right here in the Springs doing that beta test, and the app isn't there to replace any teachers. Oh no, instead it's going to help personalize the learning experience for those students.
11 News reporter Rebecca Gavassin is in the studio with us. She looked into Powerbuddy, and Rebecca, District 11 has about 3 to 4 teachers who are using it right now.
Erica, a Spanish teacher at Coronado High School, has been one of those teachers using Powerbuddy in class and said it's been a great experience so far. Brent Urban said he started his testing in the classroom last October and that this, quote, new wave of technology has helped him generate ideas for his teaching. District 11 said the AI system, with a few key words inputted by the teacher, can create questions for students based on different grade and reading levels. And get this, the questions can also be personalized. The Powerbuddy acts as an assistant when students feel stuck on some of those lessons.
I have 30 students in a class, and getting immediate feedback to all 30 in a timely fashion is just a barrier. And so having some, that form of AI that can give them interactive feedback and allow them for improvement in critical thinking immediately, not having to wait, that's going to be a gift.
District 11 said PowerSchool, who created Powerbuddy, improves the product based on the teacher's feedback. The district said the program has been released to the public, but they have not yet purchased it, as they are still in the works of testing and improving the system. I'm Rebecca Gavassin. Back to you, Matt and Erica.
Don't just use the internet, unleash it with ultra-fast speeds. And with Price for Life Internet, you can keep your internet service only great for as long as you keep your plan.
Pause that.
It's your world. Unleashed.
Thank you, YouTube. So, Sarah, anything you want to say about that story and how that came about? I think it's such an interesting way to think through where we started with D11 and where are you now with that?
Yep. So it's interesting, just a year ago that we were just beginning to investigate how we were going to implement AI and how we were going to allow our teachers to use the different products, and having Powerbuddy embedded in the products that our teachers already were using, Performance Matters at that time, just felt very natural. So we went into that beta testing. It's funny, in the video, it says 3 or 4 teachers tried it out for us and got to give a lot of input And so when we first started using it, it was just a very basic content generator, test generator. And to see where it's evolved in just a year, it's going to be really exciting to show. So
yeah. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and get back and talk about kind of the state of where we are with AI and teaching and learning. So as you mentioned, you started your kind of journey with this, thinking about what enterprise AI might look like. And one thing that I think is always helpful is to also kind of ground this in our history of AI, and I'll call it the brief history of AI, as we've seen it kind of evolve. And I think something that's interesting in terms of people's perception is that AI seems like a relatively new thing on the scene, and yet we know that it's actually been around for quite a while. And so many of you on this webinar maybe know this already, but just to kind of set some foundational understanding, we actually have AI in the mix since the mid-50s when the term was first used. And it was actually part of a kind of a computer science workshop that was happening at Dartmouth College. But interestingly, we had a first chatbot created within about a decade of even having that term surface. And so that, if you've never seen that, it's interesting to YouTube Eliza, the first chatbot. And it was really designed to be something responsive that would do reflective questioning back to you. But I mean, think about where we were back then in the mid-60s, already thinking about how can we have interactions with something that is computer-based and have a conversation. Now, when we look at then the next kind of timeline element here in the 80s, when those expert systems are developed, it's kind of a big gap. We went from introducing the term to all of a sudden having our first chatbot, and then kind of a lull. So one thing that's happening during this time frame is actually computer technology had to catch up with what our vision was for what AI could do. If you think about what AI needs, it needs mass amounts of data, and then also the ability to process that data. And we just weren't quite there yet with technology. So as we get better about capacity of computer systems and the processing power of computer systems, then we start to see some real growth happening in that AI kind of space. So we have expert systems developed. These were systems that were really trained on very specific, narrow areas of knowledge, but they became then so expert that they could do things like beat the world chess champion in 1997. So when they started to really refine what they knew and applied that, we started seeing really a lot of growth that happened. We also saw, of course, a decade later, Google with its first self-driving car. We're seeing that more and more. I feel like it started there, but then we kind of had to wait for things to catch up there. But I just was recently actually in Phoenix, Arizona, and I saw Wemos everywhere. And these are these kind of automated ride sharing capabilities. So anyway, that's been around though for a while. We just had to wait for that to really kind of see where it could go with our current processes and our current kind of systems for driving. Expert systems again on Jeopardy. Again, Watson defeated the humans in 2011. And then we start seeing our voice activated assistants come on the scene. Now, people may not have really thought about that as AI per se, but it really was starting to look at conversational dialogues and ways to get assistance from your device. And so this starts to really impact our consumers. And then, of course, during the next kind of phase there, we start seeing GPT developed. And, when this first gets released, it's 2020. We have a lot happening, obviously, especially with COVID happening. So other things are taking some of our attention away. But the thing that really kind of shifted was when we saw GPT-4 arrive and get released to the public. So for the way that we think about where we are right now it's interesting to see where do we go now, because things seem to be really incrementally and very quickly growing and changing within this space. So thinking about now where we are, especially with trends and where we see things happening with K-12 education, we're really keeping an eye on what we're hearing happening kind of in the US for usage and where it's happening and how we can really think about that and leverage that for teaching and learning. So I'm going to refer to a couple of studies that have happened, a lot of surveys that have gone out. This first one actually came from Common Sense Media, but they asked students that were aged 13 to 18 how many were using something like ChatGPT or generative AI tools. And 7 out of 10 said they were using those. So one of the things we have to think about is, what do we have in place to really support student use of this in a responsible and safe way? On the other side, when we asked teachers if they were using AI for instruction, we only had about 46% that reported using those for professional purposes. And that's not to say they weren't using it in other ways, but that's kind of a gap. We think about how many kids are using generative AI and kind of what we're seeing at the classroom level. We need to think about how we can better support educators that are using AI. Now, one thing that I think has been a barrier, and I think that this is going away gradually, but teachers reporting that, they really didn't have AI policy or guidelines in place. And so a lot of them were hesitant to start using that at the classroom level without some sort of guidance or ideas on how it would best be used and how to do that safely and responsibly. So how can we provide guidance around that? And then also something that we've been doing here at PowerSchool is an annual education focus report. And one of the things that we've seen year over year is a challenge around connected data systems. Why is that so important for AI? Well, it's already a challenge we have in terms of district leadership making decisions, but AI relies upon data. And if we have data living in all these different systems, it really makes it a challenge for AI to do what it can do and do it well. So if we can remove some of those data silos and make sure that AI is leveraging a really powerful set of data, that kind of changes the story and what it could do. And then finally, when we think about other reasons why we might want to focus on the teacher side, we had a lot of teachers who were reporting that they actually hadn't had PD on AI. So a lot of that was self-taught, or there was nothing structured. So how can we better support teachers to use these tools responsibly? And so when we think about our topic today, which is the power and benefit of really using enterprise AI, it's about all of these things we're seeing in these considerations. How can we have a system that provides some of these guardrails in place that can help students use that in responsible ways, give teachers some support, provide the right data sets within the guidelines that might be existing at a district or a state level, and then really supporting teachers within that use. So here at PowerSchool, and we develop our own AI systems, we have some guardrails that we use. So what do we want to make sure that we're focused on as we develop these technologies to enhance what we can do with AI? Probably our biggest one, in my opinion, is this first one of being human-centered. The way we're thinking about enterprise AI is how do we keep the human at the center of the loop to make sure that we have validation, that we have eyes on things, that we have ways to reframe what we're doing with AI. We also want to make sure that we're cognizant of what we know exists in our language models now, which is some things around bias. And so that's kind of inherently within the data set. So how can we build our AI with resistance to that and making sure that we have an eye on fairness? PowerSchool also has very stringent data governance things in place. We want to make sure that because we need vast amounts of data, that is actually housed in secure spaces that basically has security in place to make sure that remains pristine and also unaffected so that we can really keep AI focused on what it needs to know and be able to do and really leave it at that. We also focus on transparency and user control. For a lot of teachers, what happens with AI happens in a black box. You ask a question and then it gives you some outputs with maybe not as much visibility into how it gets there. So we're building in ways for people to see those interactions and kind of get a better idea on how the AI is actually working. Equity and accessibility, we always think about that here at PowerSchool. So how can we continue to support all the needs that we have of learners and users as we think about those digital equity issues and really the equity of experience? And then, of course, ethical use. How can we help support ethical use? And here at PowerSchool, one thing we do is we don't use AI interactions from our systems to train AI. So we make sure that we're really keeping that in a safe space so that we can do what we need to do and maybe not do more than that. So our AI strategy, why think about this at PowerSchool, we can contextualize and personalize because of all the data sets we have. When Kevin introduced what PowerSchool has, think about all the systems he mentioned that all work together. Well, that's a lot of great data that AI can use to impact teaching and learning. We also have built-in adoption in mind. So by building enterprise AI into the systems people are already using, think about what that gets rid of. It gets rid of learning curves. It leverages things like existing single sign-on or rostering processes or integrations. How can we really lower the threshold of change management? Well, we build those into our own systems. And then when we think about those data sets we have, we want to think about bringing AI into that data set versus a district or a teacher having to send data out to an AI tool. There's some risks there when you start exposing student data. So we want to think about that more and bringing AI into data versus sending it out. I already mentioned transparency and user control. We build that in with things like alerts, content moderation, chat logs, trying to limit content to district provided content, feedback mechanisms, etc. And then making sure that the experience from every person using our systems, they have some kind of consistency, because that lowers the threshold of pain in terms of change and also makes it easier for people to learn some new things with tools they're already familiar with. And then finally, we do have, of course, our keen focus on K-12 specific guardrails in place, because we know we're dealing with learners and we're dealing with K-12 learners. So that kind of shifts our story and how we approach that. So, and as we kind of move into Sarah talking about what this looks like at D11, one thing that we're trying to do, and you heard that reference to Powerbuddy in the video we shared, is building in different pieces of AI within our existing user workflows that leverages all those data sets you see on the left, bring that into a data lake that we call connected intelligence, then that feeds our AI solutions that we call Powerbuddy. And we have Powerbuddies that are built into all these different workflows that we have for things like parent engagement, things like student chatbots, things like tools to help teachers generate assignment ideas or discussion board prompts, etc. So here at PowerSchool, we're thinking about how do we bring all of this together in the most seamless way that we possibly can. So with all that being said, Sarah, I want to make sure I turn this over to you and have you share what this means for Colorado Springs District 11 and how enterprise AI is really being thought about in your district, in your context, and really what that means for looking ahead.
Great. So again, like we talked about back in 2023, when the conversations were just beginning around how are we going to use AI in our schools, what do our teachers need, what are our students going to have access to, we attended the PowerSchool conference EDGE, and there was a session where you were invited to preview the new AI that PowerSchool was working on. I don't think it even had a name yet. I think it was still being bounced around what they were going to call it. But they were looking for districts that would be willing to beta test. And we thought, well, because it's already in our products that we use, we'll go ahead and this would be a great launching point. So we signed up for the content question generator beta test. By October, we had those 3 or 4 teachers trying it out, giving a lot of feedback, and we saw it change from one question at a time to multiple questions to passages being created and questions that would align with the passage. So a huge change in just a few months. And we knew that AI was going to really be helpful for our teachers to save them time.
Yeah, let me just pause there real quick, Sarah, because I realize people may not necessarily understand or even maybe know what Performance Matters is. So for those of you that aren't aware, we have an assessment platform we call Performance Matters. And one of our first things we did with AI was build in a way to help teachers quickly build items. And so, Sarah, that's what you were working on in that beta, correct? Was starting with individual items for an assessment, and then it grew and expanded from there, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. So we went ahead and put together our task force and really pulled in our teachers, our admins, students, parents to really decide how and what AI policies would look like in D11. So as that work was happening, Powerbuddy was released in Schoology. So Schoology is our learning management system that all of our teachers use to manage their content. So when Powerbuddy became available in Schoology, we definitely wanted to beta test that. So we joined that beta test. And then I reflected back at that time, all of the different conferences we were attending, AI really became the focus. So Microsoft had their first AI in education event. We participated with that. ISTE last year was just full of AI sessions. And so you could just see it go from a question of what's it going to look like to now it's just everywhere. So in August, we launched PowerBuddy district-wide, and we started some very intentional training with our teachers so that they could understand and use the product correctly with their kids. And again, it is changing so rapidly. We are able, because we have an enterprise license with PowerSchool, and because we have access to all the products, we are often invited to beta test. So we've been getting some sneak peeks of what's coming, and then also having input to help guide the creation of the product from the PowerSchool side. The tools that are now in Schoology, they've just multiplied. Every time you log in, there's more tools available. And again, we just continue to see it grow and change and become more useful and easier to use for our teachers. We have beta tested the coaching and mentoring. It says coaching and learning. We need to update that to coaching and mentoring, which is an AI product that records conversations and then analyzes them. So saves our coaches a lot of time when they're working with their mentor and mentees. And we're looking forward to the next launch, which is PowerBuddy for engagement, which will really engage our families. So lots and lots and lots of opportunities to have AI inside of our systems, which makes it easier for our teachers.
So I want to look at two things you talked about here, Sarah. One of them is, and we talked about the lack of, policy and guidance sometimes for teachers. So you have your task force developed for D11 back in January of 2024. For your processes for that task force and for the recommendations or guidance, have you had to revisit that, or is what you put in place really kind of what you're still using?
No, that is very fluid. Like we meet quarterly to review what we're doing, talk about changes, talk about what the needs are in the moment. So absolutely, it's not a one and done type policy. It's got to continue to evolve and change because the way AI is changing so quickly.
Yeah. And then the other thing we looked at, we talked about some of the trends what we've seen is not all teachers were getting the PD they needed. So I can see here you've got, intentional AI training for D11 staff in September. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like?
So we went out to each school, did a lot like we're doing now, some polls, seeing how people felt about things, just really opening up conversation and understanding what teachers needed and what their fears were. We did a lot of work around some of the fears that were out there around AI, and then did a lot of examples of how it could be helpful. And then also talked about what would be acceptable to use when you're creating content and what you could use with your students. And just, again, a lot of conversation.
Yeah. I love that you brought up use cases, because I feel like sometimes, especially for people that are new to this, giving them a starting point of like, here's a great way to just try using this first instead of just opening it up for everyone. It's a really good idea, because it can be a little bit daunting, for somebody new who's having to think about, what does this mean for who I am as a teacher? And then how do I then convey that to students? And how do I do that in ways that are really going to be a safe space for them to actually try some things out? So I love that you thought about those use cases and that you're obviously actively beta testing everything for school. So, and I also kind of want to underscore how important PowerSchool views partnerships like D11 to get that feedback. So one of the things we have built into our AI guidelines is really that transparency and user control, but that's also being transparent with us on ways we can make things better or more efficient in terms of what we're doing, with some of our different tools that we're building into the platforms. So the first question I want to ask you is, after this time frame and after getting AI rolled out with your teachers, what kind of benefits did you kind of see kind of right out of the gate, and as you've kind of grown with your AI use?
So we had a couple of quotes from teachers talking about how much time it saved them. That's probably the first response we get from teachers is it saves time. We have two different products that we use. We have a content generator, and then we also have a chat assistant. Yeah. And so the content generator, our first year teachers talked about how it was so helpful when you're just now getting started and you're building out all of your different activities and work with your kids, how much time it can save when you have that content generator. Also, the student assistant has allowed, a special ed teacher talked about when he's working with a small group and kids need help. They're not coming up and tapping them on the shoulder or standing behind the small group. They are able to like ask a question and then get support. And that has really been powerful as well. We have one teacher that's using it to provide feedback for their writing. So he said it has saved him so much time, because before he would collect the students' writing, have to give feedback, really spent a lot of tedious time giving necessary feedback, right? But now the students can put their writing into Powerbuddy and get immediate feedback. I think Brent talked about that too in the video, how when you have 31 kids and they want instant feedback, how valuable that can be.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of two things that I heard there. One of them being the time savings. And I think that's probably, as you said, a really good place to start, because there's a lot of things that we do that just takes up a lot of bandwidth. And, how do we help people focus on what they need to focus on? And then also the whole idea of how do we do this at scale? So when we think about personalizing learning, the challenge has always been not the desire on our side to personalize learning, but how do we do that at scale when you've got 31 kids? So I think I've often said, like, I feel like we've been talking about personalized learning now for 30 years, but I think we're getting close. I feel like for the first time in my career, we're going to see that as a reality. And Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just such an overwhelming transformation on so many different levels, from just the day to day, a Tuesday at 9:15 in the morning, that a teacher has to be thinking about AI, as opposed to probably the board meeting or even having a parent-teacher meeting, where, I mean, it's just kind of all this all-encompassing sort of thing. And I did want to mention that we did get results from the poll from earlier this hour, and where it's kind of 2/3 really have not really have AI yet as a key part of their educational approach. 8% aren't using it at all yet. 23% are exploring it but not implementing, and then 38% using it occasionally in teaching and learning. So it's still very much this, transformation is in flux right now. And I guess one of the questions I had for Sarah is, how much of this is kind of a purely technical challenge versus something that may be more of a cultural challenge? Because again, I mean, we talked, and in that news segment, the guy started out by saying, "Don't worry, it's not taking teachers' jobs," right? And that's always been like, there was this original fear cycle that I think worked through, and then there's a hype cycle that we've gone through. And now hopefully this certainly feels like a reality cycle. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that technology versus cultural.
Oh, absolutely. There was a misunderstanding of what AI could do. And a lot of people did think that it could just replace teachers. But when you keep your AI human-centered and you have teachers using it to enhance their teaching, not replace their teaching, they start to see what other teachers are doing, right? And so the models are out there. We, by no means is every teacher in D11 using it yet, but we have some really forward-thinking teachers being very creative in the ways that they're they're using the tools. Yeah, like you said, it really varies between their technical skills, their comfort with creating their own content. Even a lot of teachers use just, their curriculum and aren't out creating necessarily all their own content. But when they see that their students need help and they need more, it's a great tool. So there is a lot of wildfires starting in different areas. You see it in different contents. Like our world language teachers absolutely need more than maybe our math teacher. So.
Yeah, and Kelly, does that could you concur with your experiences as you see districts begin to use this stuff?
Yeah, I think when you talk about the cultural aspects of it, I think that's in one way, that's why the guidelines are so important, because I think it gives permission to be curious and to look at things and understand where you can go with it. I think it lowers the fear factor, to be honest, when you have some guidelines in place. I think the other thing that helps overcome, is it a technical barrier or is it a cultural one, is trying to make the technology as frictionless as possible. And so I think that when it is built into existing tool sets, the fear factor is lessened also because it's already in a workflow they've been doing before. It's simply an enhancement. So it's not replacing a workflow. It's just making something easier. Now, will we get to things that are a little bit more complex and a little bit more, kind of in line with what we're seeing with agentic workflows? Sure. But by starting out with something that's familiar in a familiar setting, you're also not telling people they've got to go learn something new and try to figure out the technology itself and how to work, in something that might be in people's minds, the Terminator. I think one of our challenges is that the depictions of AI from Hollywood have all been relatively frightening. So how do we remove that? So.
Yeah, sorry,
you're not the Terminator.
Yeah,
with my name. So.
That's right.
Had to put in that reference there. I know you
bet.
Are you from the future, Sarah? I guess another thing that I find with our coverage here at eSchool, which is it's every day, and there's so many different aspects to it. And again, you talk about kind of the fear factor, and it kind of focuses on the student and the student use of AI. And what we're kind of talking about here are teacher tools, right? I mean, but how do we work on that side of things as well? And is that something, Kelly, as part of the PowerSchool solution that you're addressing? I mean, there's, the other aspect of this is that we're all learning how to use this at the same time, the faculty as well as the students. And it's like, so on the one hand, you could have a teacher in 6th grade science saying, don't use AI to do your homework, but I'm going to use AI to put the lesson plan together. Like, how do those two things jive?
Well, let's take a look, actually, because I think part of what will answer that question, Kevin, is kind of what the teacher tools look like, because that will lead into then how we have the student-facing chatbot, which is something that also is part of the solution. So as Sarah said, there's kind of two flavors. There's the how do we help teachers generate content quickly or come up with ideas that might have just been kind of a cognitive burden that isn't necessarily worth their time to focus on. And then how do we turn that around to helping students then engage with assignments and with learning in a responsible way? So if we look at the teacher tools, and this is kind of what Sarah alluded to, one of the things that we noticed was that teachers didn't know necessarily how to build good prompts. So how do we take that burden away? And so, Sarah, I know you've talked about this before, but when we first started this, what did this look like when you were beta testing? What did it look like on the teacher tool side?
It was just a box where you entered a prompt and maybe picked a grade level, maybe picked a language. You didn't have to, but there were options, and then it just generated. So from that to this in less than a year was a game changer.
So what you see here is basically examples of things that are already kind of I would almost call them like scripted, so that if a teacher says, "Oh, I'd love to do a mnemonic device," let me just pick that. Well, it already fills in some of the pieces of the prompt for you, so that all you have to do as the teacher is fill in anything that's specific to the context or topic. And then that means that you're lessening kind of also the burden of like, what does it mean to actually get good responses from AI? And this is an area that I think we're going to just see grow and change and kind of morph into new things that we think about. And as Sarah said, new creative ways that teachers can start to leverage AI to do some things that are kind of fun. And that might be something that, they could then actually get excited about doing again and, kind of rejuvenating their interest, even in a topic they may have been teaching for 10 or 15 years. So.
Yeah, and that seems to be the general consensus too, is when you have educators who are interested and passionate about their jobs, and they're also instinctually interested in the subject matter that they're probably teaching.
Yeah.
And then considering the audience that we have on here right now, there's a certain automatic interest in the use of technology to facilitate those things, which if anything else came out of COVID, I think a lot more people now understand the benefits of these sort of tools in terms of being able to do their jobs. Well, and you both were talking about this a little bit earlier about how it can be so overwhelming. And one aspect of it being overwhelming is the constant change. I mean, we could be having this webinar tomorrow and there'll be different aspects of what we talked about today. How do you recommend our audience here kind of keep pace of what's going on without going nuts?
Well, it's actually a good question for you, Kevin, given that I feel like eSchool as, a place to actually share what's happening. I think, tapping into some of those resources that are, ones that are sharing what's new, what's coming out, things that are specifically education focused can be really helpful. I know that I follow some folks on LinkedIn. I Teach AI is a great organization, as is AI for Education. And I feel like publications like eSchool also help people feel like they can keep up without getting overwhelmed, because you can sort of control the flow of that information and find the things that are really interesting to you. But Sarah, what about you? What are your thoughts there?
Well, like I said, every conference I'm attending right now, there are multiple options to learn about how different people are using AI in different ways. And I walk out every time like, wow, I never thought about that. So just being open to learning, and I think just letting teachers talk to each other as they start to brainstorm ideas.
So again, it's not necessarily the technology, but sharing the best practices. It's another kind of cliche of just saying, hey, how do you use this? This is pretty cool. And kind of make it go that way. And that's kind of an organic bottoms up way that teachers can innovate. But again, we're talking about AI in the enterprise space, and very much, Kelly, when we're talking about PowerSchool going into a district, it's very much kind of a top down sort of situation. So here's the district, and is there an easy way to marry that bottoms up versus tops down? Do you feel that that's what's happened at Colorado Springs? And can you recommend maybe some strategies on how to encourage that marriage? I'll put you on the hot seat first, Sarah.
So when you're saying there's no mandate that you have to try it, but teachers were already interested in it. So giving them, like Kelly said, a safe space inside of the learning management system that they already use didn't feel like a top-down directive.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you're kind of already in the walled garden of PowerSchool, which kind of gives you, and maybe that takes some of the fear factor away as well in terms of, AI hallucinations and other stuff kind of being pulled out of, the internet, right, Kelly? I mean, can you talk a little bit about, You mentioned the guardrails before, but talk a little bit
Yeah.
about how that works.
Well, I mean, one thing that we try to think about is also the workflows that we have in place where it naturally fits. So when you said like top down versus bottom up, one of the things is this is available for teachers within, let's say, the assignment creation workflow. Well, then they can, when they prompt PowerBuddy to get some assistance with one of these things, then what PowerBuddy does, we have a partnership with Microsoft, and this actually runs through Azure to make sure that we're pulling things that are contextually relevant. And then we have ways in terms of the management side of this to tell PowerBuddy certain things to provide, specifically though when we're looking at students. So that's actually kind of a good segue, Kevin, because you asked earlier, like, how do we think about this now spilling down to students? So I wanted to ask Sarah too to weigh in here about what have you been seeing with the student side of it, and we think about the kinds of outputs that might be happening and what they can now do with their learning when they're using something like a chatbot assistant.
So I don't know that students are very aware of how much their teachers are using AI to create their content, but I do think we're getting feedback that the content is more relevant and timely and fun. And more personalized, like we talked about.
Yeah.
But then also when we look at the chat assistant, when they are in an assignment, the teacher can enable the chat. So it's not always on. The teacher turns it on and turns it off at different times. Maybe the teacher turns it on just in the evening so that if the student is working on their homework, they have a chat assistant. Or maybe they turn it on only in class so that they can watch and see when the students are using it. And that chat assistant definitely has guardrails, because if they're in their English class and they ask a question about social studies, PowerBuddy will come back and say, you're working on an English topic right now, and redirect them.
It says it nicely, Kevin. It says it very nicely. It's a very polite buddy.
Yes. Very, very nice little personal assistant.
Yes.
And also teachers have the opportunity to say they want it to have a research mode where they're just going to be answering questions, or they can put it in Socratic mode and PowerBuddy will guide the student to ask better questions. So a lot of options to meet the needs of your different learners. So feedback from kids were they love it. They love that they can ask help. Sometimes you have that kid that's never going to raise their hand, but they can type in a question and get an answer. The teacher also gets a log of everything that the student is asking, which I think is probably the most powerful part of it, because as a classroom teacher, I never knew what some of those kids were just wondering in their head. They didn't say it out loud, but now I can look at the chats and see what types of questions and how many times they're asking questions. So I love that last quote at the bottom. At first, it felt like I was cheating. That again, students feel the same way teachers do, that there's like this whole thought that when you're using AI, you're cheating. And if you're using it correctly, you're not cheating. You're getting the help you need. So it's been powerful.
So for those that are curious, what does this actually look like? We thought it might be helpful to kind of show like where this might intersect with the student's workflow. And as Sarah mentioned, this is something that is enabled by the teacher at the assignment level. So we're back to that idea of lowering some of the fear that students will kind of go off on their own and do something where there isn't oversight into what kinds of things they're asking or what kind of information they're getting from AI. So teacher turns that on, decides which mode they want to actually enable, whether it's research or Socratic mode. And then, as Sarah mentioned, because the chat assistant has information that's super helpful, like it knows what course the student's in. It knows what the assignment is. It knows, for example, what kinds of standards are trying to be addressed by the assignment. It knows the topic context. Well, this all of a sudden gives it a lot of power because it knows, first of all, how to keep the student focused on the task at hand. but it also gives, I think, a broader view of what's happening with the student. And I think that's the area that we're going to see grow more and more and more, because think of all the data points we have on a student. If the PowerBuddy is able to ascertain that the students had difficulty in a certain area, well, all of a sudden it can really start to tailor what it does with this particular student, with this particular learning task, to kind of, I don't know, rethink how we might now envision proving what you know and showing your understanding. So I think that's going to be really an exciting space for us to get into. Again, getting back to that promise of personalized learning we've been talking about for a lot of years now. So anything you'd add, Sarah, in terms of the chat assistant? I mean, you gave some really good quotes there. I love I think he's super helpful. It is like, you can see the icon here. It is definitely not a scary icon. It's a nice, happy, it animates, it's PowerBuddy. Yeah.
Buddy.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So speaking of that, you mentioned, Sarah, in that kind of opening, because you have access to all of these different things inside of PowerSchool, you've got the enterprise licensing, which, lets you kind of dip in where you'd like to dip in for some of these things. What other PowerBuddies are you using at D11?
So we have Connected Intelligence, which you talked about, which is our data lake. And then we have PowerBuddy for analytics. So if a principal wants to know how many students were absent and have 2 Ds and an F, they can ask a natural question, and then it generates the report back to them. So getting into that data as a service, our education research office that does all of our data is using that to really hone in and answer those very specific questions that our teachers and administration are asking. So that one has been amazing to watch that grow and change. And again, with all of these data points coming into Connected Intelligence, being able to synthesize all that data quickly has been very helpful. Then we're getting ready to roll out School Messenger and My Power Hub, which will have that PowerBuddy for engagement, where parents will be able to ask those natural questions as well and get their answers right away. Coaching and mentoring will continue with that one. That one's getting ready to release. Has it released already? Do you know, Colin?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. And then Analytics and Insights is another product we have from PowerSchool, and it will have PowerBuddy as well. So lots to come.
Yeah, and we started the conversation with obviously how we're working with different AI tools with teachers and how do we save them time, and then how do we support students in a better way. But there is a whole other area that you mentioned here that's so critically important, which is giving AI tools to our leaders so they can make really good decisions. Having data has never really been the challenge. It's making sense of the data that's been the challenge. And I think we have some really great opportunities with AI to help with looking for patterns and for finding something without having to build a SQL query or, look through different spreadsheets. I mean, to think about all the things I used to do with spreadsheets. And frankly, it's a little scarring to think about all the different spreadsheets I used to have to work with, and having that be easier as well. Right. So I also wanted to ask you, as we think about looking forward, what kinds of things are you looking forward to, Sarah, in D11 with PowerBuddy for the next school year?
Well, I think, like I said, not everybody is on board yet, but I think that we're going to see more and more and more creative uses from our teachers. I think as it evolves, it's going to become more personalized, like you talked about. It's going to kind of be like when I'm a school librarian, when we first had to learn how to use Google, and we had to teach kids specifically how to search in Google, and how that just now is natural for kids. We don't have to do these really specific lessons. We're going to have to kind of do that with our teachers now with with AI. They're going to get more and more and more comfortable, and the conversations will change to how are you using it instead of are you going to use it? So it's exciting.
Well, yeah, and I think the fact that you brought up how, I guess, malleable your AI task force needs to be with approaching things like guidelines, that's going to be another space to really be interesting to watch as we look at how things grow and change with AI. And speaking of that, I also did want to kind of bring up a couple of things that I think we're trying to do when we think about what's coming next. And, sometimes it can be overwhelming to look at a bunch of tools on the teacher side. So some things that we're building in is a way for them to actually favorite some of these. So there may be some of your frequent flyers you want to use more often than not. When you've got 30 plus tools, in that list, which ones do you really want to surface to the top every time you go in? So letting people actually, heart those or favorite those, I think is going to be, that's going to be a very welcome addition. The other thing will be different places where we can interact with the Powerbuddy. So we talked about having that at the assignment level, maybe getting a quick draft mode in place so that teachers can, without having to put in a bunch of extra parameters for what it wants from the content, having a quick draft mode for those who get more and more comfortable with using those tools, or just going into the all tools area from here. I think one thing that we've noticed is that there are standalone AI tools that are out there, but it often involves people having to have multiple windows open. They've got to copy and paste, bring it into another tool, refine it again, make that student facing, whatever. Being able to kind of close that circle makes a lot of sense, and it actually saves a lot of time. So how can we build that in to some of these teacher tools? And then this one I actually love, because Sarah, you mentioned the value of having the chat log as, as a teacher. Having AI then give you, the teacher, summary and insights for what the interaction looked like with that student. I mean, that's really huge. And so this is the one I'm really excited about, just because this gives the teacher then insight not only to what the chat looked like, but helps them kind of learn quickly, like, what do I need to focus on tomorrow? Because I know, Sarah, you mentioned that the chat logs right now have been helpful. Where do you see this kind of happening with the teachers that have been using it?
That's going to be amazing. So, because right now they've had to just scroll through and read each one, but to be able to have Powerbuddy summarize and say, your student asked 3 questions off task first and then came back to being on task, or
Right.
They understand this topic, but they don't understand that topic. That's going to help the teacher really understand next steps.
And speaking of other things that are going to be super powerful, I think the other thing where we're going to see a lot of growth and development is actually in helping kids access information in maybe a language that isn't English. So an ongoing challenge we've had, how can we provide a way for students to interact in their language? And Sarah, you mentioned our parent engagement. Think about all the parents that are trying to access documents and information from a district where they can't always get it in a language that is easily recognizable and understandable. So this is one I'm super excited about as well. There are some language options already, but building that in for the student chat and for parents is going to be really great. So looking forward to that for sure. And then kind of to wrap things up, finally, this whole idea of personalization, because we have all these data points, one thing we're building in is a way to actually have a student profile and have data points that will give the Powerbuddy some hooks to get those kids engaged. And, we've been around for decades now in education, and I'm thinking back to classroom instruction that works from Marzano and all those findings where the teacher in the front of the room was the most significant impact we had for what you could control. And now we're learning that that's shifted more to student engagement, that is now outpacing the teacher in the front of the room as where we see real growth in student achievement. And the more we can tap into things that the kid is already interested in, the more that helps keep them engaged and engaging with the content in ways that make a lot more sense to them and gives them maybe some hooks for learning more and getting more engaged.
I love that. That looks amazing.
Yeah, so that's a stay tuned. So Kevin, I know we're almost at time. Any last questions you wanted to ask or pose?
No, I knew the toughest part of this conversation would be to end it, Kelly. We could go on for quite a while, and I know there's plenty of other features and functions, but there's nothing left from the audience for questions. I really just take the time to thank both of you, Sarah and Kelly, for a really very informative presentation, and also like to thank the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. So thanks again for participating, and everybody have a great day. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Sarah.
Right. Thank you.